Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Doomsday Clock issue 10, and we finally get some answers in regard to the effect that Dr. Manhattan has had on the DC Universe. So get ready guys, this review has plenty of spoilers, so if you don't want to know any spoilers, just maybe go read it, maybe come back and watch the review later on, because this is a spoiler-filled review, and the spoilers begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, here we go. Guys, when Dr. Manhattan left the Watchmen universe and came to the DC Universe, he arrived in the DC Universe on April 18th, 1938, which was the same day that Superman premiered in the pages of Action Comics. So there's a lot of meta going on in this comic book, and it's awesome. It's just awesome. And the first person he met when Dr. Manhattan got here was a down-and-out actor by the name of Carver Coleman, who would go on to play the lead role of Nathaniel Dusk in the Hollywood movie in the DC Universe. Now, when Dr. Manhattan arrived in the DC Universe, there's two things that he noticed right off the bat. Number one, there was something different about the people. He just noticed there was something different about them. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe there was because they seemed to be perhaps a little bit more hopeful, and they seemed to be a little bit more prone to good than bad. And the other thing that he noticed was that he couldn't see even 3 minutes into the future. He felt the same way he did when he had tachyon interference in the original classic Watchmen story perpetuated by Ozymandias. He couldn't see 3 minutes into the future. It took Dr. Manhattan quite a while to adjust to be able to see into the future. Eventually, over time, he used Carver Coleman. He took Carver Coleman to a diner, and he focused on Carver Coleman, and he tried to peer into the future. And every year at that same time, he would meet Carver Coleman, and they would talk, and he eventually he conversed with conversed with Carver Coleman, and Carver Coleman, of course, went from a down-and-out actor to a very famous actor who played Nathaniel Dusk in the series of movies where he plays Nathaniel Dusk, a successful series of movies in the DC Universe. Now, what's interesting, though, is when he arrived on Earth, when he arrived in the DC Universe, it was on April 18th, 1938, the same day as Superman premiered. What's interesting, though, is that he noticed that over time, things seemed to shift, because on April 18th, 1938, he heard about the appearance of Superman. He actually went and he witnessed the actions of Superman lift up that green car, and that classic scene from the Action Comics #1. He witnessed all that. Also, in November of 1940, he witnessed the formation of the Justice Society of America. That gained part of their inspiration from the appearance of Superman. And he was even there at the meeting when at the original meeting in November of 1940, when the Justice Society first met around that round table, that classic image from All-Star Comics #1, with the Justice Society meeting for the first time. And he saw them, and he witnessed that meeting, and he saw that they talked about maybe recruiting Superman, because Superman was one of the best of them, of course. But then a strange thing happened. He noticed that suddenly Superman just disappeared from the timeline, from the 1938 timeline. And then Superman appeared in the 1956 timeline. And then Superman disappeared from the 1956 timeline, and then he reappeared in 1986. And then he disappeared from 1986 and ended up appearing in 2011. Well, what happened here? Well, it's interesting because in our timeline, 1938 was the premiere of Superman in Action Comics #1. 1956 was the beginning of our Silver Age in comic books. 1986 was the beginning of the Man of Steel, John Byrne's Man of Steel. And 2011 was the beginning of the New 52. So all of these timelines where Superman the timeline of Superman's origin, his life began to shift, and at different points along the timeline. And Dr. Manhattan noticed that an outside force was manipulating things, and that it always seemed to focus on hope. So whenever there was an adjustment in the Superman timeline, it seemed like outside forces, that Superman always seemed to return with the spirit of hope. And he noticed that the Anti-Monitor and Extant were forces that forced basically a reconfiguration of the Superman timeline. And all of that coincides with the so-called crises that the DC Universe has experienced for a long time. Now, this made Dr. Manhattan very, very curious. And what's so cool about this is that he tried to do it himself. He goes, well, if Extant and the Anti-Monitor can do this, he tried it himself. And so that's what prompted him, out of curiosity, to sort of move the lantern away from Alan Scott, which ultimately, of course, killed Alan Scott. He never became Green Lantern. But it also created the New 52 Superman. And Dr. Manhattan makes some very interesting comments. He felt that he could relate more to the New 52 Superman. The New 52 Superman, of course, which was the 2011 incarnation, which is when the New 52 began. Dr. Manhattan felt he could relate more to the Superman of the New 52, and he found that very, very curious that he could relate more. But he also noticed that when he started to do that, when he messed with the timeline, he noticed that the timeline began to push back to him, and that his actions never went unnoticed, and it shows him being confronted by Wally West, Kid Flash, and he noticed more and more he started to getting pushback, almost as if hope was pushing back against him, and that there was something about the DC universe, something about that prime Earth that made it different. And what he calls it is the Metaverse, or the Metaverse, Metaverse, the Metaverse. And because it's a Metaverse, it's very interesting, because this is a first revelation that we got, that the prime Earth of the New 50, the prime Earth of the DC universe is in fact the Metaverse. In other words, whatever happens in the Metaverse, when Superman's origin and timeline shifts from era to era, that the whole multiverse shifts with it and adjusts accordingly. So Dr. Manhattan recognizes that there's something very, very unique and special about the prime Earth, and he called it the Metaverse. And that's what's so cool about this, and that it explains so much. And leave it to Jeff Johns to come up with such a brilliant concept, because it really makes a lot of sense. Now, what are the forces that are prompting or changing the Metaverse, this prime Earth Metaverse? Well, you know, I guess it's the writers of the DC universe in our world, which I suppose is Earth, the original, or I guess Earth 33, if you want to use the multiversity timeline. But it's interesting that Dr. Manhattan notices that it didn't matter whether there was one Earth or 52 Earths or a whole slew of them. There's something about this particular Earth, this prime Earth, that always seemed to be the one that sort of that is the centerpiece upon which all other Earths of the multiverse are basically formed and take sort of inspiration from. And that is very, very interesting. And most depressing, I guess, to Dr. Manhattan is that he realizes that Dr. Manhattan has always, for the most part, been a man of inaction. He's always he's been more of an observer. He sort of stayed back. Even during the Watchmen series, he didn't necessarily get particularly active, or at least at the end of the Watchmen universe, he just wanted to be an observer and go and explore the multiverse. And when he went to explore the multiverse, he saw himself more as an observer. But what he found is that the moment he became active in Prime Earth and he tried to change things, the Superman that he ended up creating, the New 52, or the New 52 Superman, he felt that the universe pushed back and that suddenly he found himself becoming the villain. There was a very interesting phrase that he goes here, that he mentions. Dr. Manhattan states that dark directions seem to constantly target the hope that Superman embodies in an effort to redefine him. That somehow hope is always being redefined through Superman himself. And that's very interesting. And whether it's a metaverse or 52 universes or whatever, the metaverse seems to be key into playing into all this. And Superman's influence even extends into the far future, even into the Legion of Superheroes. And this is something that prompts Dr. Manhattan. He's expecting, since he's become the villain, he still doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. He's expecting to do battle with Superman. He doesn't know if he's going to be killed or if Superman's going to be killed in the battle that he foresaw. But he knows that one of the things that he wanted to do, and he did it early on in the issue, is that he took out the rest of the Justice League, in particular Green Lantern. He takes out Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, and he says, look, I need you guys off the playing field for reasons that will become clear. Now, exactly what those reasons are, we're not sure, but clearly Dr. Manhattan is anticipating a confrontation with Superman, but he's unclear as to what that outcome will be, even himself. And of course, we readers are unclear as well, but it's really exciting to wonder exactly what's going to happen. This is really exciting stuff. I'm loving this. I love the way it sort of explains all the history of the DC Universe, and even speaking outside the DC Universe as a comic collector, being familiar with the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the John Byrne Man of Steel era, but the modern age, and of course the New 52 age, all of which are different ages that embody different aspects of Superman, and how hope can be viewed differently perhaps in each of those particular eras, because Superman was slightly different in all those eras. And the way that it's drawn here by artist Gary Frank is amazing. The different incarnations of Superman and how he evolves and how the DC Universe evolves with him is very, very significant. You could really see how Jeff Johns does a great job of writing a story that embodies really the butterfly effect, how one slight change in someone's life, like for example Alan Scott, whether or not Superman exists or not, or depending on which incarnation Superman is in, it has profound effects on the entire multiverse itself, not just the metaverse, metaverse primeverse, but the entire multiverse. This is really good stuff, and you can really see how it's all connected here. The smaller story with respect to Carver Coleman himself discovers because he's friends with Dr. Manhattan, and he's the only one that can really see Dr. Manhattan's true form. He becomes aware that he's going to die. Carver Coleman ultimately ends up being killed by his own mother, blackmailed by his own mother, and killed, and he knew that he was going to die. And there's some symbolism there, because even in the movie itself that he's filming with his co-stars, it involves him being betrayed by his lover, Nathaniel Dusk being betrayed by his lover, and she gives him a gift as he lay dying, and the gift is basically of a glass crystal world, and it basically, the Dr. Manhattan mentions that worlds live, worlds die, and it's sort of reminiscent of a crisis. And so there's a crisis in the movie of the adjournment, the story within the story, and there's also numerous crises being referred to in the ongoing incarnations of the metaverse as dictated by the 1938, 56, 1986, and 2011 versions of Superman as the story is progressing. This is a really great story, guys. There's so many little Easter eggs in here, but I want you guys to just read it and enjoy it yourself. This is well worth the read. Jeff Johns has hit it out of the park. Gary Frank's art is fantastic. This is really good stuff. Guys, tell me what you think of Doomsday Clock number 10. Hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. Until next time, Comic Boom out.